Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. I realise it's very, very late in the day and it's very, very late in the week, but lucky for you, each of our panellists has promised to say something that'll change your world during this discussion, at least one thing, and there are 5 of them. So do strap yourselves in, don't go anywhere for the next 40 minutes. My name is Brian Murphy. I'm very grateful to be a frequent visitor to India and a very passionate believer in India's prominent future in the world's energy systems. And that's the topic we're going to focus on, which is India at the core of the world's energy supply chains in terms of manufacturing for energy transition. So this means, for example, equipment, components, materials, technologies to build the energy value chains of the future. It means building market share and competitive advantage in global markets at the same time as growing and transitioning the domestic energy system. And it means there's a lot to get right in terms of scaling foreign investment, policy and international relations. So it's both a wonderful opportunity and a wonderful challenge for India. I feel very fortunate to be able to introduce and welcome our panellists. So Eric Vemer, the President for Africa, Middle East, Asia and India for Chart Industries. Siddharth Gupta, the Chief Executive for the electrolyzer business at L&T. Amit Sharma, MD and CEO of Tata Consulting. Rajnesh Trivedi, the CEO of SFC Environmental Technologies. And Vivek Bhatia, the MD and CEO of TKIL Industries. To structure the conversation here, we will first take stock of where we're at today, what's bottlenecking growth today, almost today forward, if you like. Secondly, we'll talk about 2 very important bridges to the future in terms of policy and technology. And thirdly, we'll cast our eyes more from the future back, what's going to be important to the customers, supply chains, and competition of the future. So as a starting point, where are we today and what's next going forward? Just to give very quick context there. So from an India perspective, we are 10, 11 years on from the Make in India settings, which were set by Prime Minister Modi. We're well and truly into the substantial development of the Indian economy relative to the 2047 expectations. We're in a country that's uniquely well positioned relative to the Middle East, Asia markets and elsewhere. And we're in a country with access to enormous talent and technology and a few handy cricketers. From an energy perspective, we've been hearing very, very clearly over the last few days, energy transition is immutable, it's inevitable from here. It's a transition which means growing hydrocarbons as well as new energy. And it's a transition which is going to continue to have uncertainty. From a global supply chain perspective, we've seen a lot over the last couple of years in terms of supply chain security and resilience, thinking about pandemic, conflict and trade dynamics over the last few years. So that all sets context for where we're at today. It shapes the present. So given all of that, Vivek, we'll start with you. And we'll start with a very, very fundamental question, which is simply why? Why do you think it's important for India to focus on renewable manufacturing now at all?
Brian, thanks for the introduction and for the question. I think it's a very relevant and a very important question. There are several aspects to this. If we look at it historically, I think India has always established a robust ecosystem for power equipment. And that has been at the heart of our strategy as a country to be relatively independent in securing our ability to build power generation units. And just from a continuity point of view, of course, it makes sense that we should do the same with renewables. There's another aspect which I would say is also in the context of the large labor force that we have. So if you look at manufacturing as a percentage of GDP, we are around 15 or 16%, and that needs to climb to 25%. And definitely manufacturing has a huge role to play And renewables represents, I would say, the best opportunity for us to improve on that percentage. And then, of course, I think given the overall macro environment and the uncertainties in supply chains, I think it's equally important that as we think about a long-term transition, as we think about building these plants at a significantly higher scale compared to anywhere else in the world, it makes a lot of sense for us to have a robust manufacturing ecosystem within the country.
Thank you. Now, Eric, you have a substantial manufacturing footprint here in India. We are 10 years on from the inception of the Make in India program. So I'm going to pose you two questions in that context. What are the key challenges still facing manufacturers today, notwithstanding the Make in India program? And then what do you think can be done more to accelerate the pace of that manufacturing development from here?
Yeah, all very relevant and good questions. But you said I need to do something to
life-changing.
Make the audience wake up. So if you don't remember anything else today, I say make manufacturing sexy. All right, because that's one of our challenges that I'll be speaking about in terms of talent. And there's always a battle for talent. India has a wealth of talent. But we do have challenges in terms of attracting people into manufacturing and the right and the top talent, because we compete with the other sexy industries of, IT and other aspects of commerce and banking and so on. So that attractiveness, that's also for us as an industry to do in terms of early engagement at the schools and the technicons to make sure people want to come and work in a very attractive, exciting world of manufacturing. But let's, reflecting upon, the Make in India strategy, and firstly, I'll contextualize to say I'm not being critical. It's always easy to be critical in hindsight around policies that have been made 10 years ago. But if I look back at what those policies said, one of them was around making business easy, a fundamental principle, and making sure that government is the enabler or facilitator as opposed to the regulator or gatekeeper. And that also was around changing the mindset. It's something we were chatting about earlier, about the mindset of people in the industry that regulate the industry. And we have a lot of practical challenges around regulation that continues to hamper the pace at which every company wants to grow, and we want to grow strongly. We want to bring our international IP, our technology into India. We want to provide our products to our customers in India, but the process to get those products approved goes through a very arduous regulation process. Often multiple agencies, multiple departments and ministries involved to approve, which delays the pace at which we can bring these new products to service our customers in India. And that regulation also applies to our factories. The approval to manufacture certain products in our facilities also goes through a very arduous regulatory process. So that still needs to happen, the acceleration, truly enabling that positive mindset. Let's enable this, let's facilitate international investors to come in. The other pillar of the Make in India that still remains challenging is around infrastructure and logistics. The reality is we still are faced, compared to our other factories that we have elsewhere in the world, faced with significant logistical and infrastructure challenges in road transport, in power and water provision to our factories. I think there was a statistic I saw that says that India still has 15% of GDP spent on logistics, whereas in many of the other markets we manufacture, that percentage is 8 or 9%. And that makes you immediately from the get-go at a disadvantage in terms of price competitiveness versus manufacturing elsewhere in the world. So those are the challenges. I think in terms of, obviously they need to be addressed. The other aspect, which currently in India is left mostly to the original equipment manufacturers like Chart, is around the whole supplier base and development and depth of quality of the supplier base at the standards our global customers expect in terms of health, safety, and quality. And you need that depth of supplier base to enable us to accelerate how much we manufacture here, not to still have to bring in substantial parts of what we produce from our parent companies in Europe or the US or elsewhere. We want to localize more, but it cannot be left to the OEMs to have to create that depth of supplier base.
Yeah, thank you. I think points around speed and ease of doing business are particularly pertinent in energy transition markets, which will be dynamic and rapidly growing. Thank you. Amit, from a technology point of view, you see global technology, you see indigenously developed technology. How can India accelerate the development of indigenous solutions in clean energy, hydrogen storage? Do you see specific initiatives or focus areas there that are required?
I think, as you rightly said, this is the 11th year of Make in India. Some good things have happened over these years. I think we've experimented on certain policies in the PLI definitely has come out well in terms of accelerating some of the work that's happening, whether it's electrolyzers, hydrogen, or semiconductors. But I think the foundational blocks one needs to understand, and I'll categorize into 3 areas. The first one, any ecosystem to thrive and rapidly accelerate needs, layers around it. And I think the cluster hub approach or industrial cluster approach is something we need to look at rather than a fragmented approach. And many of this needs to be on mission mode. Now, while some states have had policies that accelerate when an investor comes in and indigenizes things, but it can't be in isolation. We need to balance it with an equilibrium across India. And for that, there has to be an industrial cluster hub approach because you need industry, academia, labor, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, multiple investment layers after layer to the core sector. That approach would accelerate a lot of the things, including talent, infrastructure, and reduce the cost of production on the indigenous side. The second thing, I believe, is on providing true industry academia collaboration in doing some foundational research work, not just indigenizing in terms of adopting something from outside, but doing some core research with pilot grants, R&D projects. We've seen some good stuff happening in few of these areas, but I think more is required. Truly, when you get to technologies that have been indigenously developed at TRL 1, 2, 3, and you expand that to commercialization, you will see an accelerated approach. And this applies to all the sectors we talked about: clean energy, storage, batteries, hydrogen, semiconductors, etc. And lastly is about the human capital. I think accelerated indigenous supply chain requires trained manpower, labor, manufacturing shop floor, and I think that's where the educational and the academia working closely with skill development in specific areas needs an approach. Rather have maybe 500,000 engineers rather than 2 million engineers, and more polytechnic and special skill set folks who can work on this manufacturing and really provide the human capital required for it. Lastly, I think I just want to add that the CSR approach that went in for industry academia probably needs to be widened with private sector working very closely with the Institute of Eminence to work core technologies, foundational technologies, and taking that to commercialization with a large indigenous offtake. Thanks.
Thank you. And Siddharth, if we turn our attention to Indian companies truly being competitive or take leadership positions in global markets, what are the challenges that you think Indian companies must overcome with that higher bar, gaining a significant amount of global market share?
Yep. Thank you, Brian. I would categorize the answer in 4 parts. The first one I would say is innovation. And actually, if you look at countries where the manufacturing is contributing beyond 25%, and typically I've been studying the case of China. So I come from an electrolyzer background. and my company is an electrolyzer OEM, so which produces green hydrogen since it is powered by solar. Now, if we have to be sort of relevant to the question is, as far as a global market supplier, then I would say innovation. Why? Because ultimately the product has to have quality, reliability, and efficiency. And if you take the Chinese model, I think the agility with which they come out with new products on a continual basis and the money that they are pumping in research and development is something which has awed me, And by the time typically you have, say, an electrolyzer stack of X megawatts, you will find that they are working on a 2X module size. So this is the first factor which I feel our mindset has to revolve around innovation and investment in R&D. The second point is naturally cost competitiveness. Now, when I say cost competitiveness, I'm benchmarking in sort of markets where Chinese products are a threat, and if you look at that area, then it also brings us to the point of having a scalable factory. So when I say a scalable factory, I come to the point of as big you can sort of have your factory in India, naturally you will get more cost competitive capex out of it. So this is the second challenge, but why I say it is a challenge? Because ultimately in this sector, the demand is not commensurate to the type of capacity which I would like to build. So I have a factory which is ready for 400 megawatts right now, but is the demand over there in the market? So that is a question mark. Third aspect is supply chain challenges. Now ultimately, again, I will quote the Chinese example. If in China, you have an electrolyzer OEM base of 9 gigawatts, what you actually find is the backward integration is so good that they develop a vendor base which is equal to that 9 gigawatts. That means those component sourcing is equal to the electrolyzer OEM capacity which is there. So this is the third biggest challenge for us. So in terms of developing a vendor base which is commensurate to the product which you are manufacturing in the factory. The fourth one, I would say, is guidelines on testing, standards, and certifications. And why I say that is, you need to have unified codes, you need to have unified standards, harmonized standards, which are acceptable in that parts of the world where we are supplying these equipments. So these are my 4 main points. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Now, Rajnesh, you sit in a slightly different space, waste and environment technologies. And so again, sort of if you think about how Make in India has impacted your industry over the past years, and from that lens, what you see as the biggest challenges holding India back now.
No, thanks, Brian. Just to add in terms of what our colleague said, Eric took my point of the mindset. Look, there is definitely a change in the mindset which is required. But what is mindset? I mean, if you see, India has a great mindset. I mean, the largest, IT service professionals available. Globally, we are the largest exporter of services. But can we translate that into manufacturing? No, we can. But why not? That's the key question behind it. What we are trying to do is we are trying to change the hardware, but we're not changing the software. And software is what I call as the mindset. We're talking about make in India. I think we should be talking about made by India. What is make in India? There's a global technology. I'm just manufacturing it here. Do we want to be a Vietnam? Do we want to be a, any other country like that? No. The idea here is the aspiration, the size of the country is too big. So what we need to do is we need to start thinking made by India. And made by India is not only for us, but we are also then manufacturing for global, for global population, for the global world. If you see the largest green manufacturing which has happened in India, we can give solar as the biggest example, renewable energy. But now, what happened with that? What happened was that while it was make in India, but it was made for China. who was the biggest beneficiary of Make in India in renewable energy? It was not India. Yes, it translated into cheaper power, but did it translate into cheaper manufacturing? No. We were assembling. Today also, with the largest, potential per capita requirement of energy and, capex, we are still importing. So as you said, what is important is that before we are coming up with policies for manufacturing, ancillary, the equipments, that ought to, happen before. Then only it can be made in India or made by India. Otherwise, what we are doing is we are getting into too much manufacturing of low end or just critical, non-critical manufacturing, which is not really helping us. And I think we need to attack that. Having said that, and how we've learned ourselves in an industry like the waste management and wastewater, there was no technology. India was not having any technology. And let me tell you, all the European companies in India came into this segment much before, any other sector, where, all the MNCs came. But what happened? Today, if you count, none of the MNCs are there in India in this sector. Why? Because they found that the professionalism, the policies are not there. The policies are there at the central level, but maybe at the ground level, it's not there. So I think what we need to focus here is that apart from all the things which we talked about, that, we have to have the right approach, we have to have the right mindset, the bureaucracy. But what's also important is innovating the technology. Because technology is something is going to change how our approach towards manufacturing is. Right now, we are only looking at manufacturing just as a process of manufacturing it. But I think we have to start looking at how we can adapt technology, how we can innovate on technology, and how we can make that technology into, technology plus, which I think, what China is doing. So I think, there is a lot of, improvement which is required. But having said that, there is a lot of changes which have happened. And I think these changes should take us to the next level. Specific to your question of what we have done, our focus is always within technology. Because we believe that with technology, whichever sector you are in infrastructure sector, you can still have return on capital employed of 30% plus. It can only happen if you have technology. Because technology what pays. And it is not about, changing the technology world by large, even a small change. Just giving an example, iPhone comes with just a small change here or there, but the finesse with which they bring in that change, you're compelled to, keep on, paying that, premium and buying it time and again. So I think what is very important here is that if we really have to become a manufacturing powerhouse, apart from, the focus on scale and size, I think we also need to open our mindsets towards improving the way how we're looking at manufacturing, and which is, where I think our software, our, IT capital, the population of educated people which we have can be utilized in a better way to change this world.
Yeah, so some encouragement there to really sort of elevate how we're thinking about what can be manufactured, the value that can be built into it, and therefore the positions that India is able to strive for on the global scale. Good. So look, so far I think we've heard some of the practicalities of where we're at today and what can unlock that going forward. Things like, growing and scaling through industrial clusters, growing the human skill set that's required to scale quickly, the logistics, the reality of building out a proper supply chain with a complete supply base, the reality of what's required to be cost competitive on a global scale, and the reality of some of the standards and certification, for example, that would help along the way. And we've touched on the importance of innovation as a building block to the future as well. I want to just pose a couple of questions. I'll pick on just two people just to touch on policy as well. It's been hinted at throughout, but Amit, I wonder if I can go to you. Thinking about specific policy areas or incentives that you would like to see in place to support the private sector scale up, thinking about indigenous technologies as well?
Yeah, I think private sector can be the real catalyst to accelerate all of this, but I think the mindset change out there will be on the ability to take risk on new technology. And how do you basically give assurance to a new early adopter on a technology that's indigenously developed is to really have the roadmaps very clear. A technology roadmap also requires stable policy. It requires consistent messaging around the focus areas so that private sector can create a business case and really go, on a 5 to 10 year horizon to develop the technology, adopt it. And so the risk appetite will come through getting an assurance on the roadmaps. How do you get the technology roadmap? You get it through deep private sector involvement in industry academia partnership to do path-breaking research and to make products fit for India. Over the years, traditionally we've adopted proven products from outside. I have many a times interesting discussions where folks ask me, can you get us an innovative solution? When you present the innovative solution, they say, has this been done 10 times somewhere else? And that's the risk appetite mindset, right? So you want innovation, but at the same time you want proven, and that goes contradictory. Now, to really do that, one of our thought process that we've met with policymakers is to say, allow CSR-funded pilot projects between industry and academia to be patented. Because unless it's patentable, you won't really get the best ideas in collaboration with academia. Now, the catch-22 is, if your R&D is incentivized directly or indirectly through your funds or through specific mechanisms, the best of the ideas would not get into academia. And therein lies the concept of what's your core competency, what you need to collaborate on, and you need to collaborate on right from the concept stage to the circularity stage, much beyond just CapEx, getting to the OpEx and circularity. And to do that, I think it needs policy on investment in technology roadmaps and getting stable policies toward that for a long-term view. It needs a cluster approach wherein, as I said, the entire value chain and ecosystem players can work cohesively. It needs collaboration with the best, with the benchmark, with a view that we're not producing this product for India, but for the global masses. And of course, creative contractual arrangements. For example, you need to have assured supply chain, critical raw material assurance, stability and offtake on demand. Only then the policies and the technology roadmap will work in tandem. Needless to say, a lot of the demand can also be provided by PSUs, which today are still large movers and shakers in India, apart from private sector that will put in their own capex. And I think the technology and policy made right, like the recent National Science Mission, is talking about a good amount of core research in this area, like high temperature, material research, metallurgy, looking at material adjacencies. Why an electrolyzer needs exotic rare earth materials? Why can't we look at different technologies on that? That will require fundamental research. It'll only come when private sector, PSUs, and the policies work together. I think there are some good steps taken with the recent mission and some good success, but I firmly believe that for us as policymakers, advocates, and innovators, we must look at the academic alignments, the supply chain resilience and assurance of demand, and also a risk mindset to adopt what is truly innovative and not just adopt proven technologies that feeds the purpose of looking at indigenous approach.
Yeah, you're describing quite a mix of policy types there, aren't you? Sort of industrial policy, economic policy, policy to incentivize innovation, diplomacy as it relates to raw materials, and you're also describing things that policy can't solve for, which is the mindset point that a couple of speakers have made. Siddharth, I'll go to you next. You mentioned innovation and the importance of it in the global context. I wonder if you can reflect on policy and regulatory support in the global context. Are there any other specific measures in your mind, policy, that could entrench a competitive advantage for Indian manufacturers globally?
Thank you, Brian. So I'll again initially I think my co-panelist has covered some of the points which also comes in my mind. I would definitely like to start with the government has put the National Green Hydrogen Mission in place in 23, which really gave a vision of 5 million metric tons per annum of green hydrogen by 2030. So that is the statement in place, and accordingly, sort of refineries, fertilizers are coming out with tenders in part to be able to meet this capacity. My only point is that demand creation is central to the whole sustenance of the green manufacturing sector, and whether mandates should be introduced by the government. So we are also meeting the concerned ministries and putting forth this point that they must introduce mandates, whether it is in city gas distributions, so blending of 5% or 10% hydrogen with natural gas, or second is, I would say, in the refineries. So once the mandates come in and this sector starts moving, it is essential because that will act as the minimum throttle there. The other point which I have, and I had mentioned it initially, is the incentives which have come as a part of the National Green Hydrogen Mission for green hydrogen projects, for green ammonia projects, or which are envisaged to the electrolyzer OEMs, also need to be provided to MSMEs. Because ultimately, to build the supply chain, which was also mentioned, is absolutely essential for this sector to thrive and for the whole value chain to get addressed. Now, the second part which you mentioned, that some measures as far as competitive advantage is concerned, I would just say, typically, I again come back to electrolyzers. And in electrolyzers, typically in alkaline type, nickel is one of those materials which is required in abundant measures, which India does not have. So I think the government needs to have a government-to-government tie-up, probably with countries which produce nickel. It could be Indonesia, Canada, Russia, but I think that is one factor which will give a big advantage as far as availability of this raw material is concerned. And second is a favorable duty structure for the items which we have to import, which will give us a competitive advantage. The third point is, I come back to the point on research institutes, which have to be identified, wherein practical problems are given to these research institutes, which categorically state, say, 3 guidelines, which is first could be indigenization of the entire value chain. The second point could be increase the efficiency to these levels, which basically means number of units of electricity for 1 kg of hydrogen to be reduced. So ultimately, if you take measures like this, you will find that we will have a product which naturally makes a mark, and we will have our own place as far as the global market is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to stick with you just for a moment, Siddhartha. I'm going to move us more to the future world in which we need to be competitive. Just thinking about what you're hearing from your customers globally, is there any insight there as to what else the manufacturing industry needs to prepare for?
Well, the global customers, what comes out from them is a product which has quality, reliability, and when I say that, I mean the benchmarks, they compare us globally with all the OEMs. So, it is from these aspects: is your product safe? Does your product meet the international quality norms? And what is typically the reliability of your product in terms of the product life, in terms of the mechanical life? These 3 are the fundamental questions which clients come to us and have extensive discussions on. And ultimately, during those technical discussions, we have to benchmark against our competition and say, here is where we stand.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Back to the basics, just with a different set of needs in the future.
Yes, thank you.
Amit, just quickly back to you. Thinking about the global supply chain context of the future, and particularly as we think about how China +1 strategies will play out, is there anything else on your mind in terms of attracting foreign investment as global trade moves around and global supply chains shift?
Yeah, I think we're going to see a trend of localization, a bit of globalization balancing act across the globe. That's the macroeconomic as well as a geopolitical shift that we are seeing. And of course, that requires money. And money flows when there is stability, when there is a long-term view and a strong national domestic market, for example. I think we have all of that. I think there is stability in our policy. More needs to be done. A lot of good work has happened. I think the domestic consumption can be definitely given. But if we really want to ride this supply chain resilience with China Plus, I think a couple of things are required. Number one, we need to look at FDI and its related threads on a mission mode. It can't be, as I said, localized with few states that are, futuristic in their view. We need states to compete like the provinces in China that compete to attract money. It's an internal competition where a hub will come up, whether it's automotive, steel, cement, etc. I think that competitiveness index between the hubs in India and states needs to be run on mission mode, and money will flow. No country in the world is at a scale like ours at 6.57%. I think money will flow naturally, but the internal competitiveness will drive benchmarked approach in mission mode. I think second, we must accept while few states on fingertips have improved the land acquisition process, if you want to really get capex coming to India with FDI, the land acquisition issue needs to be resolved with stronger policies and a time-bound framework. That includes, of course, the right things on environmental, utilities, water, etc. Given. You go to China, how did they accelerate that? In the boundary of the industrial cluster, you had everything connected at the boundary. Water, electricity, treatment at an industrial level. And you just had, and even the land was flat, you didn't have to work on it. I think that's where the competitiveness will come for getting FDIs attracted. I think the third part is creating raw material assurance. How would it be procured? Do we need long-term G2G agreements on rare earth or what is called as critical mineral for that value chain? Are we doing enough to sign 15, 20 years contracts at G2G, which allows raw material and supply chain assurance? And I think then comes the demand assurance. I mean, all of these investments can't really justify if you don't have a strong domestic. And of course, if we do benchmark products, our product mindset has to change. And I will just take a bit of time on the product mindset. Product mindset talks a lot about the whole product innovation funnel and a structured approach to creating a product that's sustainable and long-lasting. Concurrent engineering is good, like when we do our infrastructure projects or manufacturing. We try to do design engineering and construction and the whole thing concurrently. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We need to have a proper stage gate approach for a true innovation funnel flowing from an idea to its conceptualization, prototyping, and scale up. And that's very much required to do systematic approach to this to truly create a world-beating product. Lastly, I think collaboration needs to be in the DNA. Firms that invest and attract capital must clearly show the roadmap of what is core to them and what are the areas that they'll collaborate with the best in the world. And collaboration doesn't happen at the last stage, it happens at the concept stage, it happens at the detailing stage, it happens at the circularity stage. So core competencies, capabilities, collaboration, and really accelerating and getting a very transparent approval process, including the land acquisition, are some of the things I believe we should look at for the next phase of evolution on this. Thanks.
Thank you. Now back to you, Eric. You represent, I guess, the competitor of the future in this landscape. Thinking about it through the eyes of an executive who's trying to build a competitor at scale in this future environment, why does a company like Chart Industries believe in India's future, and how would you characterize your plans for India's future in that regard?
I think it's a lot that you've heard my colleagues just speak about. But actually, if I reflect on the opening presentation done, the video conference by Prime Minister Modi at the start, and some of the things he mentioned there to kind of give context to this entire conference, it's all of those things. And, you know, I would categorize them under, call it under 5 Gs, something else to remember, 5 Gs. So firstly, it's around the growth. And as my colleagues have said, growth is attractive to a foreign investor. So the Indian growth is the highest. I look after the region, you know, spanning Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa, Middle East, and India. And India is the highest growth market for us. So that naturally is attractive. The next was around, call it geopolitical position. And India is remarkably stable in a very unstable world. So it's a politically stable place for us. We've got a long horizon on the stability of India at a political level. So that ticks the box. The next would be on, the next G is on geography and just the location of India. It's ideally located to service our customers in Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, Middle East, Africa, and the rest of the world. And our strategy is very much around not just investing in India to make products for India, but for India to make products for the world and all of our customers. So that's an important position. The other would be, the next G would be around, I think I'll use the word geology, but it was around the resource factor advantages of India in terms of ample sunlight, you know, the mineral deposits that are starting to be explored and mined in this country. We're also very active in servicing mining customers with deep experience. So another very attractive aspect for us. And then the commitments to green. You know, we have a number of technologies and products that can enable that energy transition, whether that be in the hydrogen space or in decarbonization space, or just the efficiency of our products to enable a much lower carbon footprint to our customers. So they're all attractive, and maybe I should add the 6th G, which is just around the great people. You know, we have a team led by Parvesh, who's sitting there, who's Indian. We have great people in India, and I'd absolutely support the concept of it's not make in India, but made by India. Because we bring IP here, but we find that we have an engineering center in India and Hyderabad that supports the world, and we get a lot of technology ideas and improving our products and making them more efficient, and how we can extend some of the products to not only our customers here, but globally. So all great factors for our business, and that's why we continue to invest and we put our money where our mouth is. India is the country that we committed the most capital to for my region this year. We've got many other markets in Vietnam, Indonesia, South Africa, and elsewhere. But India's receiving the biggest capital commitment this year. And Parvesh knows he needs to double our business in the next 2 years, otherwise he's in trouble.
Well, it's a very clear investment case and a very clear mandate for Parvesh. We have 2 and a bit minutes left, Rajnesh. I'm going to go to you, and then we'll leave a couple of minutes for Vivek to close out. Rajnesh, you made a very clear point, compelling point on mindset before. If you throw your mind ahead to 2030, 35, what else gives you confidence about India's future in the green manufacturing world?
I think a lot of points have been, covered by my colleagues. What I feel here is that while there is a huge potential for capacity building and mindset creation, one point which Siddharth mentioned is that while you are increasing your manufacturing capacity, the capacity building of the demand is also very important. Look, in some of the businesses, the demand is private, but in some of the businesses, the demand comes from government. Now, especially in a business like us, where we are into sewage water and creating biogas, CBG out of municipal waste and agro waste, the demand comes from the government. Now, you have the technology, which is a path-breaking technology, cutting technology, but you don't have the demand. Because when you go to the government and you ask them to implement these projects, the limitation which you face is that you've created a product, global product, but you don't have the accessibility of the payment to pay. To consume a service, you need to pay for that. Because you can create good technologies, but if you don't have the demand coming in to substantiate that demand to a point where that commercial scale adaptability can happen, the new technology will never find a way into commercial stage. So I think one thing which is very important and very critical is that while we are talking about demand creation and technology, adaptation by the government has to be there.
Yeah.
They need to take that extra effort to say that, look, if we are creating the hydrogen capacity, we have the capacity to pay to, purchase it. Otherwise, you will land up into a situation where you will have good capacity, you will have great demand, but you don't have the industry which is ready to accept it.
Yes.
Now, another good point here is that you need to push the government to do it. So like, Siddharth said that, look, we need to have, mandates given to the public sector undertakings or some of the larger corporations to, accept it. But then at what price? Because then whole game will be that, look, I am, let's say, a government entity and I'm using taxpayers' money, so I cannot, pay you at a higher price. You need to be competitive with respect to what I am currently using. A typical example is grey hydrogen versus green hydrogen. I can generate, green hydrogen, but the price is at a point where I don't have the flexibility to, accept it.
Yeah.
So I think, these things are great, but the government also need to act as a catalyst of absorbing the new demand and the new technology which has been created by the private sector.
Yeah. Great, thank you. I am just going to borrow, if you don't mind, one more minute, just to make sure we give Vivek a chance to close out. As you stitch it all together, step back, other bold moves, critical imperatives in your mind?
Well, Brian, I think it's been a fantastic conversation so far. I think all the right points said. I just want to mention a few things which I think can provide some more color to already what has been said. Well, firstly, I think technology, if it has to be adopted at scale, needs to be competitive. Because at the end of the day, economics trumps everything else, right? So whether it is green hydrogen or renewable power, we need to bring it to a level where we can make sure that the end customer finds it viable to use it. The good news is, even with a LCOH of $4 a kg, green hydrogen gives you a 70% discount on a per kilometer basis compared to diesel and petrol. And anybody interested in the mathematics, happy to sit with you afterwards. The other thing I really want to underline is that when we look at government, I think they have a huge role to play in getting India to have a robust ecosystem. The good news is they have done it in the past several times. So if we look at the automotive industry, they have done it very successfully, and we have one of the best ecosystems for automotive manufacturing, going down to tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers. There's no reason why we can't do it here. We did the same again with conventional thermal power equipment, and at one point I think everybody in the world was manufacturing in India. So I think there is a lot of precedence that when the government gets down to seriously pursuing it, we can get it done, and we have to get it done.
Yeah.
And then last point, we talked about innovation, and I think innovation is key because you can't make it better, you can't do it efficiently if you don't incentivize the right people to think about better ways of doing it. And there you really have to look at academia, you have to look at startups, and you have to look at industry as much as you look at government and policy on how to make that happen. And I think India, we tend to forget about it from a policy point of view, but I think the education and skilling side of it is extremely important, perhaps as important as, everything else, because without the right set of people, without the right set of academia, I think industry will not be able to go far,
Yes.
right? So, that would be
Brilliant.
my quick summary.
Lovely, thank you. We will close there. My only closing sentiment is clearly there's a lot that needs to be brought together and can be brought together, but you can't help feeling that the next 3 to 5 years is kind of a critical period where this opportunity could be really gained or forgone. So exciting period ahead. Thank you, panelists, very much indeed, and thank you, audience, for persisting late in the day.